Thanks for joining us for this Boise Turnkey AMA. Corby, here we are, man. We made it.
All right. Yeah, thank you guys for your patience. We had a little technical difficulties, but I think we're up and rolling, and I think there's a few more people waiting to get in. So hopefully we'll fill things out a little bit. But the idea here is I have some basic kind of introductory real estate investing stuff that I want to cover, and a little bit of a guide for a conversation, but I would love some interaction. If you have questions or thoughts and you want to raise your hand or put a message into the chat, or just jump on and ask that question, I would love that. I would like it to be organic and to make sure that you guys are getting your questions answered too. So thank you guys. I'm just curious, by a show of hands, who here has invested in real estate in some way so far? All right, so we have some people with some experience. So also by a show of hands, are you struggling to either find your next deal or to fund your next deal? Are those generally the reasons that you guys are here? Maybe like a thumbs up. All right. Okay, so I have some good news and some bad news for you guys before we jump in here. I think I'll start with the bad news. The bad news is I probably am not going to share any earth-shaking information with you guys today. A lot of times I find that people have a lot of the knowledge that they need, and it's really just a little bit of analysis paralysis. And so really my goal in having a lot of these conversations is helping people understand where they are and what their next steps might be, and getting over a little bit of that paralysis, and maybe connecting with some resources and that sort of thing. So let me see, I got to open up the chat box. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so one of the biggest challenges that I find with people who have done a deal or two, or maybe they're trying to find their first deal, is I personally think that they're asking the wrong questions. A lot of times they come to me and they want to know, how do they find their next deal, or where do they find their next deal? And I think it's more important to ask the question, what is a good deal? Because every market is a little bit different and everybody's position is a little bit different. And it's quite often that people are reading books by people who have invested in different markets or in different times, and their perception of what's acceptable or reasonable or possible is far different than what is currently possible, or maybe possible in the market that you're looking at. And so understanding what is a good deal is a huge part of the challenge as far as I'm concerned. And so part of that, in my opinion, as far as getting started, is, like I said, understanding what that is and knowing what kind of numbers your market provides. Does anybody here have any questions about the market that they're investing in? Is everybody investing in Idaho, or are you investing somewhere else? Okay. So Bobby says, what are some key ways for investors to get financing? There's lots of different types of financing. And so one thing that I would keep in mind as far as conceptually is there's a spectrum of inexpensive to expensive, and it correlates with low to high risk. And so a lot of times new people come in and they want to use a type of financing or they want to find a type of financing that's inexpensive and low risk, and those things don't exist. You can either have low cost and more risk, or more challenges in getting that, or you can have higher costs and less challenges. For instance, a DSCR loan is a loan that's designed for investment properties, and it's based on the income that a property produces, and that's very much like a lot of commercial loans. The banks give commercial loans based on the income that a property provides. So a DSCR loan is a residential investment loan that's structured like a commercial loan. Those loans are expensive, and the closing costs are higher, but they're easier to get. You don't need to provide your own income. You don't need to have a high income. You just need to show that the property that you're buying can produce the income that's going to pay for the loan. And so those loans are easier to get, but they're higher cost. On the other end of the spectrum, you have conventional loans, where with a conventional loan, you have to buy the property in your personal name. You have to provide all of your income. You have to personally be qualified. You're personally guaranteeing that property. And so those loans, they take longer to get. You have to have better income to get those. They're a little bit more difficult to get, but they're lower cost. And then there's all kinds of other things across the spectrum. I'm sure you guys have heard of hard money loans. Those are easy loans to get, and they're probably the most expensive money out there. A lot of times, if you have a decent relationship with a hard money lender right now, you're paying a couple points up front and upwards of 12% interest. So those are considered kind of short-term loans where you're in and out of a property or in and out of a loan at least significantly more quickly. Questions about any of those types of loans, or do you want to dive into any other types of financing? No. Okay.
I'd like to hear about where have you seen people who are starting out in investing who have been able to scale like into more than a couple of properties? Like, how have been the ways that they've been able to, get enough income to get the loans? Like, when you're working with investors who are like property 2, 3, 4, how are you helping them figure that out?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. And if people are going for financial freedom, I always say that there are two ways you can get there. And I use an analogy. Let's say that you wanted to go to Salt Lake City today. You could jump in a Prius and put on your seatbelt and drive 50 miles an hour and be there in 6 hours. And the chances of you getting there safely are pretty good, but it's going to take a while. And you could also rent, I don't know, I'm old, so I'm going to use a Lamborghini as an example. You could rent a Lamborghini and you could drive there at 150 miles an hour and you could get there in a couple hours. But the chances of you getting there safely and unharmed are much lesser. It's a more hazardous and risky way to go to get to your goal. And real estate is much the same. If you want to get to financial freedom very quickly, there are a lot of ways that you can do that. There's wholesaling, getting properties on sub-2 conditions, borrowing money at higher interest rates using private money, DSCR loans, and hard, or I said hard money, like I was talking about. Those are much more expensive, but you can do that more quickly because a lot of those types of loans don't rely on your personal income or your personal financial situation to get those loans. You'll pay significantly more, so your risk in that property is significantly higher. But you can make that happen if you're really great at negotiating deals or you're really great at finding deals. That's a quicker way to get there. You can do a lot more deals that way when you don't have to rely on your personal income. So that's the Lamborghini way. Then there's the Prius way, which is the slow and steady wins the race. And honestly, this is the way that I did it. And that's slowly building up your income and buying properties either through house hacking or buying a new investment property every couple of years as you can save up, and using your own personal funds as down payments. You can use a HELOC as a down payment. And doing that slow and steady wins the race. I think ideally, and the way that most of my clients have seen success in scaling their real estate portfolio with, I would say, an average person's resources is through house hacking. And we help a lot of our clients buy light fixer-uppers or small multifamilies that are fixer-upper properties where they can move into one of the units so they can get a conventional loan that's a low-cost loan. They can move in, they get a lower interest rate, they can do some things to improve the property and increase the value while they have a tenant or a roommate come in, offset some of their living costs, and then after a year, they can move out of that property and repeat the process. And so building up that equity and offsetting your living expenses along the way with low-cost loans and additional income is kind of the slow and steady way to get there. But and obviously there's a lot of people kind of mix those things up too. They might be house hacking and doing a flip using hard money once or twice a year to drum up a little bit of capital in order to get into their next deal faster. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point. I see Ashley's interested in more creative financing. Maybe walk through, like, as people approach house hacking, what are some of the options with that, and where are people successful?
Yeah, I hear the term house hacking thrown around quite a bit, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And essentially, in a broad sense, house hacking just means buying a property that you're going to use as your personal resident with the intent of finding a way for it to produce income. And so I have some clients that they'll purchase a home for themselves and they'll rent out rooms. And like, for instance, in Boise right now, you can rent out a room for, depending on a few things, between $700 and $1,000 a month fairly easily. And so if you have a $2,500 mortgage and one roommate, that can offset your living expenses by 40%. And if it's a property that you plan on moving out of in a year and a half and can rent it out in full, then that changes the equation a little bit as well. So that's one way people house hack, but a lot of other people will house hack by buying a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex. You can buy up to 4 units using a residential conventional loan. And if you're occupying one of the units, you can do that for as low as 5% down. And so, for instance, I would say an A class fourplex in Ada County is probably going to sell somewhere between $900 and $1 million, maybe a little bit more. You could get into one of those as a primary residence and live in one of the units for $50,000. So the cost of entry is relatively low. You have 4 A units that might rent for a couple $1,000s a piece, and you can live there for a year, move out, and if they're $2,000 a piece, you have $8,000 in gross income off of that one investment, and you only put $50,000 into it. So that's another way to house hack, and obviously you can do that with a single family home to some degree, but a lot of people I see doing that with duplexes, triplex, and fourplexes, using those inexpensive conventional loans with low money down. And as a side note, that rule actually just changed in the last year. It used to be you couldn't get a conventional loan for a multifamily, even if you lived in one, for less than 20% down. And that rule was just changed about a year ago so that they allow those 5% down loans. Other than that, there's also what people, for house hacking, there's something that people call live-in BRRRR. And essentially all that is it's a light fixer-upper that you move into and spend a year fixing the house up, and you move out and leave it as a rental. For those of you who aren't familiar, and we'll probably talk about this on another call in the future, BRRRR means buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat. And essentially it's a way that if you have a chunk of cash that is enough to do a deal, but maybe not enough to do several deals, it's a way that you can recycle that cash over and over. If you build up enough equity in the property over the course of a year, you can move out, refinance the property, pull the cash out, and go on to the next property, keep that one as a rental. So as far as house hacking, there's a lot of possibilities, but a lot of our clients, they will either do those live-in BRRRRs or buy a small multifamily and live in one of the units to offset their living costs and keep that when they move out into another property. And I guess there was, Ashley had some questions about financing, and so I can jump into that a little bit. There's a lot of different ways for creative financing to work, and some of them I think are relatively low risk, and some of them I think are significantly higher risk. And it really just depends. We get a lot of new investors that come to us, and they're looking for an owner finance deal that has low interest rates and little to nothing down. And I always like to say that's possible for you to find a deal like that, but it's highly, highly unlikely. And if you're sitting and waiting for a deal like that to cross your desk, the chances of you actually getting one are very low. And so that's why I started this call with kind of talking about understanding your market and the returns and setting expectations, is that if you're waiting for this this unicorn of a deal to come by, a lot of other reasonable opportunities will pass you by in the meantime. And so understanding what type of returns are possible and what's reasonable for you is really important. But so on as far as creative financing, you have owner financing, you have sub-2, there is all kinds of hard money opportunities out there and those sorts of things. So owner financing is probably the most popular. And all that means is the owner is financing some of the equity in the property when you buy it. They're the bank. And a lot of people think that if there's a mortgage on the property, you can't do owner financing. And that's not the case. The owner could be in second position on a property. So the mortgage would be in first position, and then the owner can take an equity position in second place and loan you money for that equity. And you can come up with whatever terms you want. So a lot of people will ask, what are typical owner finance terms? And I could throw out some of the finance terms that I've seen, but I've seen all kinds of crazy stuff. I've seen plenty of owner finance deals at 0% with 0 down. I've seen a lot of them at 10% with hundreds of thousands of dollars down. And it just depends on each person's position and what the property can be used for and what works for everybody. And so owner finance, those terms can be anything that you want.
Hey, Corby,
yes.
Why do people choose owner financing? So like, what's the motivation on the seller side to do owner financing? And then how do you help kind of figure out what they want to put together a deal that works?
That's a good question. More often than not, owner financing is somebody who wants to spread out their income in a property over time. And that could be for several reasons. The most common reason is somebody who doesn't want to take a big tax hit. If it's an investment property and they sell it outright and they get a huge check in one tax year, they're going to be shelling out a lot of capital gains for that year. And so by financing the property back to a new buyer, they'll have income that's usually greater over time, but each year it's lesser. And so they don't take that capital gains hit. They get to spread that tax liability out over whatever term you can agree with them. And so depending on that situation, I see a lot of people who will do owner finance for 5 years with a balloon payment. I can go into detail on that if you guys want. I've seen amortizations for 50 years on owner finance deals before, where they're really spreading it out with the hopes that their heirs will inherit this note and it'll be some income for their kids or something like that. On the buyer side, the benefit of owner financing is that you can negotiate any terms that the seller will agree to. You don't have to pull credit necessarily unless the seller wants to see a credit report, and you don't have to adhere to all those rules that these conventional loans have, where you have to have a certain amount of money down, you have to have a certain credit score, you have to have an appraisal. None of that matters with owner carry. If you come up with terms that the owner accepts, then you just basically send them payments for the house and nobody's pulling your credit. It doesn't really matter what the loan to value is. It's just two adults shaking hands and writing a contract to agree to those terms. And so it doesn't affect your personal financial situation, and you don't have to qualify for anything as long as the seller will agree to those terms.
So if you're in a spot where you can't get a bank loan, but you can find someone willing to lend to you under these whatever terms you create, and then over time, when you have equity, you can go back and get a conventional loan, cash out the initial seller, and move into something that works better, is cheaper. Is that kind of the plan most of the time?
Sure, you could do that, and it really depends on the owner finance terms too. If you get something where somebody gives you a 30-year amortization at 4%, and there's no balloon payment, you may never want to refinance out of that. But sometimes you'll get really favorable terms, but there's a balloon payment, meaning you have to pay off the entire balance of the loan when that balloon is due. And sometimes those are 5 or 8 years down the road. Then you can acquire the property today and go with the owner finance for 8 years. And then you've built up some equity and you built up some income from that property. Then you can go back to a bank and get a conventional loan on it to pay off the seller and their balance and settle into that conventional loan. And depending on what you've negotiated with that owner, that may or may not be something that you want to do. Sometimes the owner terms are so favorable that they'll beat a conventional loan, but more often than not, you're going to want to refinance a conventional when you can.
Great.
Another creative option that a lot of people the last couple of years have been talking about is sub two. Just I'm curious, by show of hands, how many of you guys are familiar with the concept of subject to property acquisition? So subject to, and some people call it sub two for short. Basically, all that is a person, a seller transfers a deed to a buyer, but they keep the mortgage in their name. And there are a few reasons why a seller might do that, but more often than not, it's someone who's in dire financial situation. They're about to lose the home, and if a home gets foreclosed upon, then whatever equity that they have in that home is gone forever. They don't get any of it. And so if somebody's owned a home for 10 years and they've come upon financial hard times and they're about to get foreclosed on, and let's say they have $300,000 in equity, they have a couple options. They could sell the home if they have the time. More often than not, when sub two comes around, they don't have the time to sell the home because the foreclosure is coming faster than they'll be able to do that. Or they can transfer the deed subject to and sell the house that way. So the mortgage stays in their name, and the buyer brings the mortgage up to date, and they make payments to that seller to get the mortgage back up to date. So the benefit to the buyer is often you can get one of those for very little down. You're saving that person's credit. And usually the terms on those are going to be better than what you get in today's market for any loan. The downside a lot of times is, at least what I've seen, a lot of buyers leave those sellers in worse shape than they started. They may have saved them from foreclosure, but those sellers are broke and they don't have anywhere to go. And so the handful of times that we've been involved in sub two deals, it's important to me that we make sure that that seller has somewhere to go after we complete that deal, that they're back on their feet and getting a chance to get things back together. And if the buyer is making those payments religiously and getting their mortgage up to speed, then they're actually helping that seller build their credit back up over time to the point where they could go out, hopefully someday, and buy a house again. But subject to is really popular because a lot of people that are having financial trouble probably refinance their mortgage in 2020 or 2021, and they might have a 3% interest rate. And if you can acquire a property subject to with a 3% interest rate and very little down for a buyer, that can be very attractive. For the seller, a lot of times, like I mentioned, they don't always end up in a better space. But I think it's important, just ethically, for people on this call, if you're doing a deal like that, to make sure that you're structuring it such that that seller has a place to go, that they're cared for, and that you're helping them get back on their feet. It's not a win-lose scenario. It's a win-win scenario.
Hey, Corby, did you see Victor's question there? Could you actually cash flow off a fourplex with the only 50K down living in a unit? I was thinking, do you want to would you be willing to analyze a deal? I found a fourplex in Boise and we could just analyze it live. Does that sound fun?
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Why not?
Here,
let's do it.
I got a screen share here.
Okay.
You guys can see that? Don't look at all my tabs, but you can.
Well, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So the deal is it's 958 here in Boise, right off the connector by Cole, within the triangle of the connector. This is a 4-unit investment. There's 2 1-bedroom and 1-bath units and 2-bedroom and 1.5-bath units, a 1-car garage, a 3-car garage, and 3-bed. So there's 4 units here. It looks like on average they're 1 and 2-bedroom. There's 7-bed total, so like 1 and 2-bedroom units. So let's just start with, what if you're just doing a ballpark estimate on rent on this property? What are you looking?
Well, and thank you for the question, Victor. And to answer your question, I think it's possible. I don't think it's possible with this property. I saw that, and we'll go through this one anyway, just for the sake of the exercise. I saw this listing pop up this morning, and I think it's a pretty big fourplex. It's 4,400 square feet, but the way the units are structured, I don't think you can produce that much income. I think that you get better ROI on a lot of other opportunities around the valley. But that being said, speaking at a high level, let's say that after your down payment, you have a loan at $9,000, and if you got or not $900,000, and if you got a conventional loan and you're at about 6%, I would kind of use just that ratio as a ballpark way to estimate payments. So at, let's say, 6% and $900,000, what is that? $5,400 a month. And I think more realistically, you'd probably be closer to like $6,500 as a payment when you add on taxes and insurance and escrow and those sorts of things. So let's say that your expense here is $60,000, or your monthly expense is $6,500, and you're going to live in one of the 1-bedroom units because those are going to rent for less anyway. So you're living in one of the 1-bedroom units. Off the top of my head, I have a pretty good handle on market rents, but on average, how are those units broken down? 2 1-bedroom and 2 1.5 bath. So 2.
It looks like there's 4 2-bedroom units, but they have 7 bedrooms total. So I think they're 4 2-bedroom, but I'm not sure.
If they're all 2, we'll just go with all 2 bedrooms because that makes things simple anyway. And most multifamily units in our market are 2-bedroom units. Yeah. The average 2-bedroom unit in Ada County right now rents for around $1,550. To keep it simple, we'll just call it $6,000. So this one, we'll just call it $1,500. So this one, the gross rents on this one would probably be in the range of $6,000, and so this would not cash flow. But also go ahead.
But if you're paying rent yourself as a part of it, then you might be able to. So you'd have to come up with what, $2,000 out of pocket to cover the mortgage. Is that what we're thinking?
Yes. Yeah, that's about right. But also there's a couple other things to keep in mind when you're investing in real estate here too. And I'm not saying that this is a good deal or that I think anybody should explore this as a deal, but a lot of times people overlook some of the other benefits. When you're house hacking like this, this is what I would consider this concept moving into a multifamily, I think is the best type of house hack you can do. When you're doing something like that, you are offsetting your living expenses. And so sometimes I'll see people on Bigger Pockets saying, I found this multifamily and I'm currently paying $1,500 in rent and I want to buy it, but it wouldn't totally cover my living costs. I'd still be paying $800 in rent. Well, it doesn't have to be perfect. If you were to do that deal, you're still saving $700 a month. You went from paying $1,500 a month to paying $700 or $800. So you're saving several $100s a month. So you have savings. It's just you're not living for free yet. And that's okay. I mean, you're stepping in the right direction. The other things to take into consideration are that when you own a rental property like this, you get all kinds of tax benefits that a lot of people don't take into account. So all of the expenses that you have, I shouldn't say all, the expenses that you have for the units that you're not living in become business write-offs. And so you get to write off 3/4 of the landscaping. Since you're living in one of the units, in 1/4 of the units, you can write off 3/4 of the landscaping. You get to write off 3/4 of the utilities. So those become business expenses for you. In addition to that, you get to enjoy future appreciation for all 4 units. And so our market on average over the last 15 years or so has appreciated at about 7.5%, 8% year over year. And so conservatively, if we say that this is going to appreciate at 5% per year, although it's not cash in your pocket, that's $50,000 a year that $1 million property would appreciate. And so your net worth is going up passively every year by $50,000. And we'll talk about this more on a future call, but as that net worth grows and you have equity in those real properties, you can borrow against that tax-free and go out and buy more properties. And so you're building up equity tax-free that you can borrow against. You're building your net worth up. And you have these tax write-offs. And then in addition to that, you get depreciation, which is probably a topic for another call also, but it's a significant tax savings to you. And depending on your personal situation, you can also depreciate the losses, quote unquote, losses from this property against W-2 income that you might have from working your day job. And so I've done deals. Actually, I'll give you a specific example. I just did a deal with a young guy who had pretty high income job. He was an independent truck driver. He owned his own truck and he was out driving, taking contract jobs, and he made great money. But he was paying huge tax bills every year. So he had a W-2 job and he was paying about $45,000 a year in taxes. And he came to me and he'd heard about real estate and the tax advantages. And so I kind of helped him strategize. And I'm not a tax professional, so I want to throw that out there, but I did connect him with a CPA to go over our plan and make sure that they supported it and it would work for him. But he bought a rental property that on paper didn't look like a great deal. It was a house that he liked, he felt good about. It wasn't a great deal on paper, but because of the tax strategies, it's probably going to put about $30,000 a year back in his pocket. So even if that property breaks even or he loses a couple $100 a month, even if he loses $200 a month over the course of a year, that's $2,400. But at tax time, it's going to put $30,000 more in his pocket. So that's real significant income that he's making on a property that doesn't look that great on paper. And so depending on what your personal situation is, a deal like this fourplex, even though it doesn't look like a great deal, it might have a significant impact on your personal financial situation. And it could have much better income than you expect if you step into it with a specific tax strategy.
Well, and not to mention let's say you're managing your own property, you could set aside one of the rooms in your apartment as an office that's a home office for the business. And then your vehicle, if you're doing runs to Home Depot to care for the building and manage it yourself, that becomes things that you can write off on your Schedule C on your own taxes. So there's kind of stacks on itself.
Yeah, it can become pretty ridiculous after a time. And I know a lot of the people that are on this call, if you haven't done a whole lot of deals or haven't had real property for a significant amount of time, you hear people talking about the tax advantages in real estate. And until you've done it for a while and started seeing how it compounds, it's really hard to fathom. But those are really the biggest benefits. I know I personally have properties that don't cash flow that well, but because of the tax benefits, it puts way more money in my pocket every month and every year than I would get from a property that cash flowed significantly better. Joey threw a link in another fourplex that actually I've looked at myself on Easy Street in Caldwell. I'm just going to open up that link real quick so I can reference it. I personally have looked, I haven't walked through this property, but I've looked at this listing and I think that this one on paper is a pretty good deal. So it's 505 Easy Street in Caldwell. You've got 4 units that are 2 bedroom, 2 bath, 4,200 square feet. So these are big units. Each one's 2 bedroom, 2 bath. It's relatively updated. It's in rentable shape, and the price of $720 is pretty competitive. That's their asking price anyway. This one I like, and one of the reasons that I'm mentioning this is in Canyon County. I think everybody on the call is in Idaho, but in Canyon County, prices are typically 15 to 20% lower, but rents right now are only 5 to 10% lower. And so the cash on cash returns in Canyon County are actually better than you see in Ada County right now. We could argue about whether or not future appreciation will be better. If tenant quality is better, that's a separate conversation. But the cash on cash returns in Canyon County are actually better than they are in Ada County right now. So this one, I like this one. So they're asking 720. I would say market rents for each one of these units is about $1,400. So what does that work out to be? $5,600. So if you were to put 5% down on this one, we'll say $40,000, and have a loan in the range of, I don't know, 675. Let me pull up my calculator here. Just run some quick numbers. So at 5% down, I would say your loan on this one is going to be closer to about $5,000. If you're house hacking property like this, it's probably going to cash flow. You've got $5,000 in monthly payments for your personal loan, and you're probably going to have income somewhere in the mid 500s. And so, while I wouldn't, I guess I should say, if you're comparing this to a fourplex in the Midwest, in Cleveland or in Indianapolis, those cash on cash numbers are going to look a lot better. But for our market, this is actually a pretty good deal, and it would probably be cash flow positive even as a house hack. Just to kind of go back to that idea of investing in the Midwest, and we get a lot of people who come to us also, and they want to know if we can make numbers work like that. And the fact of the matter is that the cash flow in the Midwest and in the South, it's going to be better than what you get here on year one. On 99% of the properties, you're going to have better cash on cash returns in the first year. The difference is those markets don't appreciate the way that our market does. I mentioned 7.5% was our average. In some years, we're appreciating 2%. But some years we appreciate 12% or 15%. During COVID, we were appreciating between 25 and 30% year over year for almost 3 years there. Those properties in those markets, they don't appreciate that same way. And in addition, a lot of times you're dealing with Section 8 tenants and a little bit rougher crowd. And so their turnover is higher, operating expenses are higher. There's a story that I use a lot. There's actually a lender that I work with regularly here, and a lot of my clients work with. And in 2017, he bought a fourplex in Indianapolis, and he paid $250,000 for it. It was a D-class fourplex. If you guys are familiar with those gradings, D-class is basically a very rough neighborhood, a rough house, rough neighborhood. It's a place where people have to be, not where they want to be. But the numbers were great. He paid $250,000, and it was supposed to have gross rent somewhere around $5,500 a month. And so the cash flow would have been fantastic. So he owned that thing for 5 years. And not only was it not performing, but it was only cash flow positive 2 months out of 5 years. And he should have been cash flowing about $3,000 a month. He was only cash flow positive twice. And that's because tenants would disappear in the middle of the night. They didn't pay. They caused damages that forced him to make repairs or pay for capital expenditures that he hadn't planned for. It's a whole different ballgame over there. And I just want to throw out there, I don't want this call to feel like a sales pitch or anything like that. I know a lot of people that invest in the Midwest, and they do just fine. But it's a different ballgame over there. Investing in our market, you're going to get higher quality tenants, higher quality properties, but you're going to pay for it. It's going to cost you more upfront. But as the time goes on, those deals and those properties will get better and better and better. In the Midwest, you're going to get better returns right away, and it's probably going to stay pretty much the same forever. However that property performs in that first year, it's probably going to perform the same indefinitely. And sometimes that works for people, and they can scale over there, and that's great. I have some clients too that they'll do a deal or two in the Midwest, and then they'll come do a deal here, and they try to kind of mix their returns and their risk a little bit. I know I got a little bit ahead of myself, but Tom typed in, I didn't really touch on loan pay down. So that's another benefit if you're owning a property rather than renting, on top of the depreciation and tax benefits and all those sorts of things, is that you're paying down the loan. And so you're creating some equity in that way as well. You're not paying down somebody else's loan and creating equity for them. I just talked a lot. Other questions or thoughts around any of those concepts, even if it was 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago? Okay.
We'd even
here,
take if somebody had a comment or a story, we'd take that too. It's fun.
I would love that.
Although we might cut you off if your story runs long. I don't know you people. So what's up, Tom?
I'll share mine real quick because people really like creative and owner finance, and they're always wondering how you get in these deals. And mine's real quick. It was a 2-1 house here in Boise that was on the market, and I got it owner finance at 575 with only 25,000 down. And it was because I bought it from somebody they did a 1031 exchange into this house, and they just wanted to collect money throughout, the next 10 years. My balloon's 10 years long, but they specifically, like you said, they didn't want to pay the hit on their $350,000 1031, and they wanted as little money as possible to come to them. So in the transaction, I think the agent ended up getting like $15,000 or $17,000, and they got basically nothing because they didn't want anything. And it was just because I picked up the phone and I called them and I figured out what they wanted.
I love that. That's a great story. What part of town is it in?
It's on the bench.
Cool. Thank you for
West
sharing
Bench.
that. I appreciate it. Yeah.
And it's out there. It's just you gotta call and talk to people, and you kind of get over the block of everyone wants as much money as possible. It's more if you can solve the problem. And so yeah, I got into a $350,000 house in Boise for 25,000.
That's fantastic. I love hearing those kind of stories. I think probably most people on the phone know that I'm a real estate agent here anyway, but as an agent, I do that exact same thing. Whenever I call a listing agent, whether I'm looking for myself or for a client of mine, the first thing, well, I should say I back up. The first thing I do is I go to tax records and I find out what kind of loans they've taken out and try to estimate how much equity they have in a house. And that changes the way that I approach that seller or that listing agent, because if it's pretty obvious that they have no equity, the conversation's gonna be much different than somebody who has 90% equity or they own the home outright. But if it looks like they have a good chunk of equity, the first thing that I start talking to them about is, are they interested in financing? And one roadblock that you run into, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are on the phone because you're aware of this, is that a lot of real estate agents, if it's listed on the MLS, they don't understand owner financing and potential benefits to their clients. And it's not a good fit for everybody. But if you have a listing agent that doesn't understand what those deals look like and the potential benefits to their clients, it can be really difficult. But it's the first thing I always ask: if there's equity in the property, is your client open to the idea of financing some of that equity? And you'll hear maybe or yes a lot more than people think that you will. So that's I love that story, Tom. We do owner finance deals on the MLS fairly regularly just by asking that question, and it works really great when people in our market right now, when people hit 30 or 60 days on the market, and they start needing to get out of a property, they start broadening their horizons as far as what's acceptable to them as well. I'm working with a client right now that lives in LA, and there's a property here in Boise that she's interested in buying. That's a very unique property. It's been on the market for about 3 months, and the listing agent has made it very clear to me that the seller's in a situation where they need to sell right away. And so we're talking right now about potentially getting some pretty reasonable owner finance terms on that. And it's just a property that's on the MLS. Any other stories, ideas? Okay. I have another concept that I just want to hit on here real quick. Is the idea of a buy box. Are you guys, just by a show of hands, familiar with that concept or what that means? All right, so most of you guys are, but going back to this idea of knowing what a deal is, or understanding what a deal is, rather than can I find a deal, or where do I find a deal? What does a deal look like? If you create a buy box around that, and a buy box is just a set of criteria that are acceptable for you. If a property meets this list of criteria that you come up with, that your buy box, then you're going to dig deeper into that property. And so I would encourage you guys to sit down before you spend more time just perusing Zillow or whatever the case may be, to identify what your buying criteria looks like. What do you have a maximum price? Do you want a specific cash on cash return? Are you looking for a specific IRR, an internal rate of return? Are you only looking for owner finance deals? Do you have a certain amount of cash you're willing to put down? Does the house need to be turnkey, or does the property need to have some work? All those types of things. And if it does need some work, are you willing to put $20,000 into it, or do you have $200,000? So I would sit down and just make a list of must-haves for you in the market that you're shopping in, and use that to guide your search a little bit. If you're working with an agent or a partner, make sure that they know what you're looking for, so that when something like that crosses their plate, they'll know, oh, this might be a good deal for Tom, or this might be a good deal for Bobby, and they'll bring it to you. But identifying that buy box and putting it out there to other people that are in this world can be a huge benefit. I know a lot of people that do deals just by telling as many people as possible that if a property fits into these criteria, I'll probably buy it. I think, I want to hit real quickly on just high level estimates for expenses and income. Any of you guys, whether you're working with somebody on our team or not, if you want to run numbers on a deal, you can always DM anybody on our team, and they'll help you run numbers. We have a portfolio of over 300 properties in the valley that we manage, and so we have a really good idea of what it will cost to operate a property. So if you're looking at a 2-bedroom in North Boise, or a 4-bedroom in South Boise, or a 4-plex in Nampa, we've probably got a bunch in our portfolio, and a lot of times we'll just send people annual statements on those properties, 2 or 3 of them that are very much like that. So you can see over the course of this last 3 years, these were the electrical bills, this was the landscaping cost, those sorts of things. So as far as estimating expenses, at a high level, I use the mortgage calculator on bankrate.com. I know there's a bunch of mortgage calculators out there, but they have a really great one where you can plug in all your numbers. You can play with the amortization schedule. You can see how they have this great tool where you can put, what if I pay an extra $100 a month? How soon can I pay it off? But also you could say, what if I pay an extra $1,000 once a year and it's in February? How will that affect my debt service? So they have some really cool tools on there. I use that all the time just as a high level way to analyze properties and what their expenses are. And then if you want to know like how they perform in real life as far as what the month to month cost for some of those other unknowns might be, or average out maintenance costs for a like property, you can always reach out to somebody on our team and we'll send you some of that data. As far as the income goes, a lot of people don't know or realize that Idaho has not regulated property management in any way. And there's good and bad things for that. For states that regulate property management, what that means is all of the rental data out there has to go through the state real estate commission. So they collect all of that data through the MLS systems in those states. And so I guess to put it simply, that's why you don't see rental properties on the MLS here. But if you go to a lot of other metropolitan areas and you'll see rental properties on the MLS, and real estate agents will represent landlords on the leasing side, and then there'll be agents that represent renters on the leasing side as well. That doesn't happen in Idaho because it's not regulated anyway. And so the upside to that is that you can kind of do whatever you want with your property. There's no regulations. Anybody can rent their property, and you can rent out properties for other people, represent other people, and it's not illegal in Idaho. That's illegal in a lot of other states. The downside is there's very little data because since it's sort of the Wild West, there's no clearinghouse for that information, what market rents are like, what vacancy rates are like, those sorts of things. And so there's some organizations that collect that data though. So we're members of NARPM, which is the National Association of Residential Property Managers, and they have a Southwest chapter. And so they collect that data through all their members. And that was kind of a long-winded way of telling you that that's probably the best rental data that you can get. And if you want to take a look at that, you can, again, reach out to anybody on our team and we'll send you those reports. They come out every quarter, and it breaks down the vacancy for Ada County and Canyon County for different types of units based on size and location. And it'll also break down the average rents for those types of units as well. And so if you're looking at a 4-plex with 2-bedroom units, it'll give you what the average rent for something like that in Nampa might look like. And then depending on how nice the property is, the location, you can kind of fudge those numbers a little bit. But that's really the best place to get income data. And so happy to share that information with anybody that's interested as well. So when we're analyzing deals at a high level, that's really all that we do. I look at what the expenses are going to be. I just get an idea of what the mortgage is going to cost using that bank rate calculator. And then I'll estimate, those simple things, landscaping, property management, and whatever utilities the landlord pays and what income it's going to bring. And if those numbers make sense to me, I know it's something I'm going to dig in on.
So Corby, we're hitting 1 o'clock, and I want to make sure we save some for the next AMA we got coming up. It's a week from Thursday at 6 o'clock at night. So if you've got more stuff you want to talk about, you can send that ahead and we can walk through it. I'm really enjoying doing some deal analysis because I think it gets people kind of in the flow of different ways of thinking about properties. Anything else you want to hit before we head out today?
For one, really, I'd just like to throw out, I appreciate you guys joining. We're going to have a series of these coming up. And this one was just kind of a general overview of investing in rental properties. We're going to dive deeper into some of this stuff. Probably our next call, we need to iron it out. It's either going to be on finding the highest and best use of a property. And that's something Robert and I do quite a bit, but analyzing the zoning codes from different parts of the valley and what could be done with a property. And that's everything from, can I build an ADU here? Could I turn this single family into a duplex? Up to, could I split this into several different lots and build multiple homes here? And so figuring out how to analyze those types of deals and what the cities will and will not allow. So that's one thing we're going to talk a little bit more about on a future call. And one thing that usually gets people's attention too, we're going to have a call that's all about landlord-tenant interactions and rights. And so we're going to have the general manager of our property management business come on and kind of help guide that conversation. But we're going to talk about, as a landlord, especially those of you guys who maybe want to self-manage properties, which I think is totally awesome as long as you have some processes set up. So we're going to talk about, if you're going to self-manage, what type of processes should you have in place? What should your interactions look like? What rights do you have? What rights do the tenants have? We're actually in the middle of a really juicy tenant rights interaction right now that I'll share on that call, but there's always something. It's never boring when you're a landlord. But we'll have different topics for every call. I would love more interaction. And so for these future calls, we'll give you guys a little bit more notice on what the topics will be and some guidance around what we're going to talk about. And I would love to have people come prepared to ask more questions and dive into some topics that are meaningful for them too. So
Great. Well, thanks everybody for coming and really appreciate it. If you want to reach out, Corby and I are both available on Instagram with DMs if you ever want to dive in, or we'll drop you our phone number if you reach out on the website and you just want to connect. We love to connect and talk real estate. And I think Joey's on this call too. He's a phenomenal real estate agent as well on our team. So
yeah.
All right.
Thanks guys. Appreciate you joining in. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.